months ago, Squad released the Infantry Combat Overhaul blog, and I was hyped. We all were hyped. After the first playtest, I knew some things had to be worked on, but I could not wait for them to be tweaked. Suppression was a powerful tool now. Infantry were deadly, but you no longer had the Counter-Strike, lean spam, 360 no-scope Call of Duty shooter mechanics, and it just felt fun. Hard, but fun. Then we had the second playtest, and it was not nearly as fun. There was a recoil bug that made suppression almost negligible, and that kind of defeated the whole purpose of the test. After that, we had the third playtest, and that was better, but there were massive FPS bugs that caused many people to just stop playing, and OWI even had to issue a hotfix 5 hours later just so we could get in games. The second day of testing was fun, and I did enjoy it, but what about all the people who suffered through that bugged and broken build on the very first day? The results from that first day of testing were more than likely completely scrapped, and many of the people might not have shown up for day 2 because of it. The fourth playtest allowed us to play as the Canadians for the first time, and many of their weapons were also just bugged. Weapon animations weren't working properly, both the hollow sight and C79 optics had issues, and the devs even stated that the muzzle flash itself might cause poor performance. Good thing we don't see too many muzzle flashes, right? Well, last weekend we just had the fifth playtest, and this one had a massive list of changes. Not only were we going to get the Middle East Alliance and the US Marine Corps as the next playable factions, but we were also getting new sway and breathing mechanics when attempting to steady your rifle. We were going to get new UI features which actually removed player name tags from showing through walls. And there was even an experimental local chat indicator which helped show how close your squad mates were. On paper, these quality of life changes plus all the infantry combat overhaul mechanics looked really great. But 2 hours later, and the devs had to cancel the playtest entirely due to client crashes. If you want to, you can still download this playtest update and check it out on the training range for yourself in the Squad public testing app on Steam, which is what I had to do since the test was shut down before I even got to try a multiplayer game. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty disappointed in what I'm seeing. First off, I don't know where the quality control was on this, but the Marines are done poorly. Everything about them just doesn't feel right. The M16s, like the iron sight M16s, aren't even zeroed. If you try to fire at a 100-meter target with the base 100-meter zero, you don't even come close. It's one of those bugs that is just so confusing on how the devs even broke it, but yeah, an iron sight, something that more or less shouldn't have changed that much between the Infantry Combat Overhaul and Live Squad, is completely broken. For the optics, well, they're all laughably tiny. This is the M27 with the SDO, a 4x optic comparable to the US ACOG or Russian 1P78. Or at least it's supposed to be comparable to those optics. The SDO, however, feels like it only takes up maybe 10% of your screen, with the vast majority of what you are seeing just being completely blurred. When you use the M240 machine gun, it has the same issue with that 6x MCO optic. I don't know how the devs expect anyone to see with this thing, and if this is actually the intended visuals they're going for, I think they've completely missed the mark. At this point, I don't know what's worse, if this is actually what they intended for the Marines to be looking at, or if they just completely forgot to check if it filled up the entirety of your screen. Going back to the US Army, when you use the ACOG here, you can see that there is a decent amount of blur, but the optic itself is zoomed in to take up enough of your screen that 1, it doesn't look ridiculous, and 2, you can actually see your targets. The Marine optics look even worse when you compare them to the Russians and the 1P78, which uses almost all of your screen entirely. It's almost laughable when you have to go back to the Marines and try to shoot with their rifles. Now, when you swap over to the MEA, the other new faction that was just added, the MG3 also has now one of the worst recoil patterns in the game. Even while bipoded, the horizontal recoil is so bad, I feel like you'll need an entire squad standing side by side to even land just one hit on them. I know the whole point is to focus on making these weapons used more for suppression, but even on stationary targets, while bipoded, it felt like only the very first bullet out of the weapon would land anywhere close to where I wanted it. I even laid down prone and fired at a HESCO block 100 meters away to see just how much bullet deviation you'd get, and the spread on this thing was crazy even with the slower burst firing. Honestly, I can't imagine going to a real game and trying to hit moving targets with how this is right now. Throughout the past couple months, I think I've been pretty open and supportive of the devs when it comes to this overhaul, and I understand that it's a massive undertaking to rework essentially every single part of Squad. It's also important to note that OWI also recently came out and said, hey, sorry for the lack of content, we went back this year, completely reworked our map making process, and now we're going to get you the maps, but it's going to be a little while. Like they're purposely delaying content to make sure the foundation of how they make that content is much better than it was in the past. And that is incredibly admirable, but if they're doing all the right things to make the maps better in the future, if they're going back and reworking that map making process, did they just forget about doing that for every other part of Squad? Why are we having so many quality assurance issues with these playtests? At what point do we say, hey, we get it, the Infantry Combat Overhaul is going to be a big deal, but please, OWI, just stop, take a break, do some QA, and let us test the next build when it actually works. I feel like overall the devs have the right idea, and maybe they're really just pushing to try and release this overhaul as soon as possible since this year has been a little low on the content side. But whether they realize it or not, I think they're starting to shoot themselves in the foot over this. Before that blog post in June, nobody expected this update to even exist. And when they did drop that first playtest with the Russians and the US Army, it had an overwhelmingly positive response by the community. However, it's now 2 months later, and this is now the third playtest in a row where there have been massive issues, and I think people are starting to get sick of it. To reinforce the point I'm trying to get across, when I was testing things, I went back to the Russians, one of the first factions included in the very first playtest over a month ago, and all of the animations were just broken. The player model couldn't actually hold the weapons right, things were floating, it was just so broken, I'm surprised they even got it this bad. At what point do you just take a pause on everything Infantry Combat Overhaul related and make sure you're doing it right? The whole idea of this overhaul is to get a good feeling on the new infantry mechanics, and that is mainly going to revolve around your ADS views, your recoil, and your stamina management. But if every time OWI adds a new faction and all three of these things just stop working, what's the point of the test? This is a waste of time, and it's starting to feel not only rushed, but it reminds me of the old alpha and beta days where a lot of broken mechanics or map layers would be added to the game and the community would have to live with them until we reported them and the devs would fix it a few weeks later. At the moment, I think QA is absolutely failing Squad right now, and I don't doubt that the devs are working hard behind the scenes, but if this is the pace the studio is pushing for, well, for the sake of the community, I really think we need to dial it back a bit, like a lot a bit, because right now we aren't getting any quality content at all. If I'm being brutally honest, I'm no longer looking forward to these playtests, but instead I'm just waiting for the look how broken this is post on Discord, followed by the inevitable hotfix, and that isn't a good feeling. At this point, I'd rather the devs just pause all the playtests, work out the kinks behind the scenes, say, hey, it's going to be a while, and then come back in a few weeks with something that actually works, but that's just me. Now, am I crazy here? Are you guys hyped for these playtests anymore, or are they starting to drag with all the problems? I really want the Infantry Combat Overhaul to be good, but it's only going to happen if the quality is there, and right now, I'm not seeing much quality at all. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, peace.